We are about to buff and upgrade your buffs and debuffs in World of Warcraft with Raven Buff Bar. It is the best add-on when it comes to buffs and debuffs and targeted buffs, player buffs, all the different types of stuff. And sometimes when you have a UI and you start moving things around, the buffs get a little weird. Whenever I have targeted buffs down here of the thing, this is shadowed unit frames, and I'm fine with shadowed unit frames, this right here, but then the buffs up here are a little weird. The new update to the game added this edit mode where you can move the buffs around, so that is nice, and it honestly is a huge quality of life upgrade as far as for myself. But Raven buffs are still just the best, and I promise you this add-on has some features that you might not even know that you really wanted or needed that can help with your rotation, help with tracking your buffs, help with tracking cooldowns, lots of different stuff that Raven can do. The biggest downside to Raven is it's so goddamn complicated, but I am here to show you in this video that it's not that complicated, and I can truly help you set up. If needed, I will make an advanced video to this and put it down in the description if that is needed, but I'm trying to show you how simple Raven is of how these buffs work. To show you just one simple thing, I'm going to go attack this target dummy, and as you can notice, I have 3 different lines for buffs. That's strange. I have a line of here for buffs, a line up here for buffs, and a line up here. What are all these different buffs? So the coolest thing is this is long-term buffs. Buffs that are longer than 2 minutes that are actually going to stay on my character. Fortification, other things like this, Battle Shout, other things that stay on my character for a long time are up here. Short buffs, as you're saying, the ones that come up and leave and come up and leave, are only going to be on my character for a short period of time. So short duration buffs go here in this line, and these are debuffs. Very cleanly organized in a very nice, and I can move them, I can change the size of them, I can do all this different types of stuff that we'll get into. But this is just even this one simple thing that I absolutely love about Raven buffs is I can do this. You could even hide these long-term buffs, if you wanted to. You can move these short-term buffs down here and be part of your UI if you want to track what kind of buffs you have up on your character. I have weak auras that do that, and I have entire videos for weak auras. But I think this is very clean because usually if I'm having a look at something or if I have a buff of some kind, I want to look up here because it's probably going to be a shorter duration buff or a debuff right here. But now let's get into this thing. So /Raven is going to bring up your buffs, and all this is this interface screen. You can see I only use really these 3 buffs: short buffs, long buffs, and debuffs, which is what I showed you just there. And if you want to set that up, that's the first thing I'm going to show you guys. But I also have some other things I'm going to show that might blow your mind with some stuff that this thing's capable of. So as always, first thing you should do with any add-on is go to profiles. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to type in a YouTube test, and I'm going to make a brand new profile. Now it's clean. If you look over here on setup, I got nothing, because the really unique thing about this add-on is you actually can choose. Right now this add-on's on, and all it's doing is hiding the stuff. You can see this enable feature at top here. It's enabling the Raven, and it's hiding Blizzard's buffs and stuff. So that's just the most default thing, but I have nothing there, and you can choose which things you add or not. So it's very, very customizable, and that's also the part that leads to things being a little complicated, but that's why I'm here to show you. So we're going to go back to profiles real quick, and I'm going to copy from my original DC 6.0, and now we're back to the original setup you saw at the beginning of the video. And as I'm going through this, you'll see what my settings are. If you want to copy them, you can, or tweak them and change them to fit yourself. So back to setup. Here's how this is going to go. I'm going to show you guys what each of these can do, and then I'm going to show you how to actually customize them and all these different types of things. It's all pretty straightforward, especially if you just go through them slowly. Here we go. Buffs. This is going to be all player buffs. Everything on the player, any sort of buff that you have is going to be there. Now, one thing to clarify for vocabulary: an aura is a buff or debuff. Buffs are buffs that increase your character's capacity in some way. Debuffs, it hurts you in some way, right? So buffs, this is talking about all buffs on the player. So if I did this and I turn this on, which I guess I got to talk about one more thing here. You can create all of these as bars or as icons. I'm going to create them as icons because that's what you see here. These are icons. You could have all of your buffs be bars. I've seen a lot of streamers sometimes have this as all of these as buffs, and they have a little spot right next to their map, and they have all their buffs in a row like that. You could totally set that up, and I'll even show you that here in a second. But if I create a buff bar, I'm going to move this over. You can see here's my buffs. Look at that little buff bar. And if you wanted to put this right here, you would be mirroring exactly what World of Warcraft has in their base UI with your buffs right there. All buffs would be right there. Now, I like to spread those out between short buffs and long buffs. So these two combined get you to where the buffs are. So if you want to have just regular buffs, you don't like the long and the short buffs being separated, you can totally space them out. But for right now, I'm gonna have this be right here. And if I do anything, if I start casting abilities and stuff, and I have all of these things that are going on, my buffs are gonna pop up here, and they're gonna fill in this way. You can prioritize them. You can see them shifting around. You can have it to be the longest duration. You can sort by duration, is furthest to the left, shortest duration is farthest to the right. Whatever you want to do, there's lots of options there that we'll get into in a second. But I'm just trying to show you these options here before we get into anything else. So that's what the buffs are. Now I'm going to delete this, and again, I can choose which things I'm talking about. So if I unclick it, it's just going to be there permanently. There it is. I can move it around. But if I target this specifically, it's only going to address this, and I can delete that, and it only deletes that. And if I want to create one, I'm going to create bars this time. So I create bars, and there we are. We have buff bars. And if you really like the look of this, it does look pretty clean. It does look pretty nice. If you want to do that, you totally can. And you can put your buffs in like that. And now whenever you have buffs, it's going to fill in vertically. But again, you can also switch all these things around to fill in downwards, fill in upwards, however you want. Which now this brings me to a spot where I can actually show some stuff here. So right here, I'm going to zoom in here, is this buff bar. If you hold your cursor over any of these anchors, this is the anchor. If I move this anchor, it does go away. You can see these options here. If I left click it, that's what makes me move it around, and I can move it in position wherever I want. If I right click it, it actually hides the anchor entirely. I'm not going to do that right now until the very end. Shift left click toggles the test bars. So right here, I'm shift left clicking, and it toggles what it looks like if it fills up, and you can see the fill direction that way. It's filling vertically upwards. So if I put that up here, it's going to look real dumb. So don't do that. And then so I'm going to shift left click again, and to do that, and then shift right click toggles the direction. So shift right click makes it go downwards. And this is just very, very clean to not have to go inside here and mess with all the settings and stuff. That's just super nice. So now shift left click, I can see, oh, it's going to fill like that. I could put it right there. Wow, that looks nice. Love it. But you can now shift right click, and you can toggle the direction back and forth. I'm going to have it be right here. And then if I hold down Alt and left click, it opens the options menu that I'm in right now, and Alt right click cycles through the different configuration options as far as you see how it's just cycling through so many different configuration options, and I'm going to get back to where there's the default. Okay, so really quick fixes you can do right here, and then if you're really done with it, you can right click, and it locks it into place. There you go. Now that is something I'm going to delete though, so I'm going to select just the buffs and delete it. It's gone. There we go. So what I do, that's what the buffs do. I like the short and long buffs. And again, debuffs, you are going to need debuffs. If you want to do this, you're either going to need to run buffs and debuffs, or you're going to need to run short, long buffs and debuffs, right? You're always going to have to select the debuffs, and that's what you'll see right there. So I'm going to deselect all of these. And one thing at the bottom here, if you scroll to the very bottom, you can lock all anchors, unlock all anchors, test mode, toggle overlays. I'm going to show that right now before I keep going any further. Unlock all anchors. There we go. You see where my 3 anchors are. I have them placed here because my quest tracker stops right there. So I don't want them to overlap and clip it, right? If my quest tracker was a little further away, then maybe the debuffs could move around, or I could move these in. But this looks fine for me right there as far as how I like my UI to look, right? So there's my my 3 anchors right there. I can lock all my anchors, unlock them, and you can see the difference there. Now, test and I'm going to lock them. Toggle test mode is really nice in the same way that you can now see what happens if I get a bunch of buffs. What happens if I get a bunch of debuffs? Are they going to start clipping and overlapping? How is it going to look? Is it going to look bad? Who knows? So right here, you can now see all of this. All of these different buffs and everything of where everything's at. These white numbers here show the stacks of whatever kind of however many stacks that I have of some sort of debuff, and the big number here is obviously the countdown on the duration. Toggling that test mode just lets you be able to turn things on and off and be able to see what happens under all those circumstances. And then toggle overlay is the actual grid lines if you want to be able to try and match them up and line them up super efficiently. So I'm going to toggle that off, toggle the test modes off, and we're good to go. All right, now I'm going to keep showing you what each of these do so you can choose this if you want them or not. And then I'll tell you how whenever we get into the settings, because again, I don't want this to get complicated. Hopefully so far it's pretty smooth. Cooldowns are really cool, and cooldowns, I think icons of cooldowns would kind of be weird, I guess, to show a bunch of cooldowns and icons. I see this more as a bar thing, so we're gonna do this as I'll put all my cooldowns in the bar right there. So now if I want, I start casting abilities and stuff, and they go on cooldown here. I cast more abilities, they go on cooldown. I'm jumping and adding extra things, and this is a list of cooldowns that are stacked up and it's showing progress bars all the way down, all the way down, all the way down. And these go for all types of cooldowns. I have a big long cooldowns. There's a 3-minute cooldown there in the middle of all of this, and it's all over the place. Now there's other things you can do, and you can customize the colors of things. We'll get to customization options in a second. This is just if you want this option or not, because you could totally put these cooldowns somewhere down here in front of your face if you want to track your cooldowns in some way. Sometimes I've seen people put it like around here or whatever, and you have your action bar abilities down here. I have mine hidden, and you can see whatever your buffs are, and maybe put it right there. Myself, I track my cooldowns through the weak auras that I have here, so I personally don't use this. Delete. Now, next thing is the target buffs and debuffs. This is pretty self-explanatory, but that's basically what this thing does that I have currently taken care of with shadowed unit frames. I have a full video on shadowed unit frames. I just position my debuffs down here, and you're good to go. Now, I will say this, in the shadowed unit frames video, I did not address the buffs and debuffs too much. So if you go to your shadowed unit frames and you go to target, again, there's a full video if you want to do this. If not, then this is a little intermission. If you go to auras, this is where your buffs and debuffs are taken care of inside of shadowed unit frames. And you have to turn them on, and then your display settings. This is how I have it. I track whatever auras that you want to track, and the position. You can set the size and how big you want them underneath. I have mine underneath just like you see there, and you can see it all right here. And I also track debuffs underneath the target and all that good stuff. You could completely, if you wanted to move this for some reason or put this somewhere else, you totally could handle this with Raven. So to create this real quick, I am going to create this as far as with icons go, and you can see this right here. You can see the target. If you wanted to put this like right here, really like in the dead middle of your screen or something, and you wanted to track those debuffs on your target, you could totally track the debuffs. Whenever you start putting debuffs on the target, you can see there's a debuff right there. And if you want to really track that specific debuff, you can also filter it to where it only tracks certain ones. I'm going to talk about filtering buffs here in a second, but if you only wanted this to track one thing, you could totally set it up to track that one thing and put it right here. But again, weak auras are just a far better way to do this, in my opinion, especially for specific things like that. So I am not the biggest fan of the targeted buffs. And like I said, shadowed unit frames already takes care of that. So I don't use that for the buffs and debuffs. Focus is the same thing as I just said for target. It's the actual buffs and debuffs for your focus target. If you have one, you can use that. Notifications. God dang it. Notifications. I have no idea what notifications do. It's the only thing within this entire situation that I don't know what it does, which is why I have it existing right here. And if you want to see where my my toggle bar is for it, unlock the anchors, it's right here. I have had this thing in the middle of my screen for I don't know how long, and nothing's ever popped up on it. Maybe I get it confused with deadly boss mods or something, or I don't notice it in a moment, but I have no idea what notifications do, so I would just turn them off. And if you know, please comment down below. Who knows? It's the only part of this whole thing that I've spent tons of hours looking for, and I have no idea what notifications do. So there's that. Buff tracker is actually really interesting, and debuff tracker. Buff tracker and debuff tracker track your buffs and debuffs on multiple targets in one single spot. The best way I can show this as a demon hunter right now is a debuff tracker. So I'm going to turn on debuff tracker, and I'm going to make it bars. And you see the debuff tracker right here. I'm going to put it over here. This is tracking, as you can see right here actually, it's tracking my two debuffs that I have on 2 current targets. And it says the word right here, target, because that is my current target. If I untarget that and I'm not targeting anything anymore, it takes that out. If I target this, and you can see I'm changing the target. So these are all targets that are currently affected by any debuffs of mine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, first of all, let me lock all these anchors so you can see it right here. You can put this wherever you want. You're going to be able to change the size. We'll talk about settings here in a second. But if I go here and I start attacking all of these things, I put all these different buffs and debuffs and all these things, I'm attacking it. Now, now there's frailty stacks. There's all these different stacks, and it's tracking across all creatures. Now, this could go crazy if you pull some huge pack or something like that. And that's in general kind of why I don't use it. I have my threat plates here. I do have a video for that as well, that I kind of can track debuffs on if I want to, but I really don't need to for the sake of a demon hunter. You might if you're a warlock or something, you're tracking your dots on all these different targets and stuff. This is multiple targets. Any target that's affected by a debuff of yours shows up there. And the same thing is true, I'm going to delete this for right now, the same thing is true for buffs, and that could be for healers. If you have a bunch of heal over times on your allies and it shows it's about to run out, maybe you want to track just tanks specifically, and you can really target what the tanks, and if you're healing debuffs or healing hot heal over times, are about to fall off of your tank. And the last thing we have here is a timeline. This is actually really cool. I'm going to have this be icons here for the sake of this, and this is the timeline. This is 5 minutes, this is 0 seconds, and what it does is it shows all cooldowns. I'm going to start attacking stuff. It shows all cooldowns of when they're going to come out off cooldown. I'm going to use a long cooldown, a short cooldown, There's some long cooldowns. There's some short cooldowns. So you can make this also as big as you want. You can have this thing be like on the entire bottom of your screen, and that's your entire action bar. I could totally see this being your entire, and you just start casting abilities, and you can see whenever they come off cooldown, and you don't need, and this could save yourself a lot of time and space if you like that. Oh, Vengeful Retreat, it's about to come up in about like 2 seconds or so. Okay, 1 second or so, and then now it's up, and then there we go, right? So I think it's a really cool thing, and it shows in one single spot. Like if I had it right here or something, it would be pretty clean, and I really like it. But again, I have a pretty in-depth weak aura setup, and I really like my weak auras. So I'm going to delete the timeline for right now, and then you can see that right there. Cool. So now this is what all of these do. So here, transitioning now into the next part of the video, changing and customizing all of this. What I would heavily recommend for you to do is do this right here. You would unlock all anchors and create whatever that you're wanting right here. You would turn on and create. So if you want the target buffs, create that right there. If you want to have a focus target, create that. If you want to have a timeline, but you want it to be bars, create everything you want. So you're like, okay, I'm a warlock. I want to have, or I want a debuff tracker. I'm going to create that as bars right there. And I want to, and like turn on everything that you possibly want. Right now, have it on your screen. It's going to be very messy, and you can at least see what these things are looking like and changing as you're going. I would also, in general, toggle test mode, and you can see some big things here as far as where they would go, and you can kind of start to organize things. Again, they don't have to be in the final location. You can move them to the final location afterwards, but you can at least get a big picture of what's going on. And I've also noticed during this video is my short buffs and long buffs, the stack counter is very tiny in the center, and it's overlapped with the text, and that looks bad. I want it to look like the debuffs. So we'll get into that as I go through these all these different options right here. So I am going to turn off that debuff tracker because that's not something I use. Okay, cool. So the next tab right here is defaults. These defaults I would recommend, again, putting everything on the screen, changing the defaults around, because this is the default configuration that an icon or a bar or whatever you create with this thing is going to have. And then if you want to specifically change it, you can. So if I have the default settings be whatever they are, and I have them be all default, but then for debuffs, I want the debuffs to be a little bit bigger though. I can manually specifically go to debuffs, which is here in the bar groups, debuffs, bar groups. We'll get to that here in a second. I can specifically change things if I want to. So anyway, for the defaults, a lot of this is self-explanatory as far as what you want or don't want. I want, what do I want? The hide blizzard. This section's called hide blizzard. So everything here that I click, it's going to hide the Blizzard interface for it. So I'm hiding the cast bar, I'm hiding the buffs and debuffs. Of course I want to hide the buffs and debuffs because I am using buffs and debuffs. I don't want to double dip on that, right? So these in general are the settings that I use. And you can change the bar width and height. You can change how far. These are, again, for bars, right? And when it says format right here, all of this is talking about format. And we are talking specifically about bar configuration. So I think my bar configuration, this is why I had to make it different, is 160. Bar height, again, all those bars you saw, you can change the bars width and height all with these settings. The icon on there. In fact, let me actually turn on this thing for you. We'll create bars. There's the bars, so you can see what I'm talking about here. Going back to defaults, bar width, you can change the default bar width for any bar that you create. Default bar height for any bar that you create, right? Icon size, how big are those icons, right? You can totally change around all these things in the where icons inset, where the icon sits, just literally everything. Just start sliding it around. You'll be able to change that all there. Icon configuration. Anything having to do with icons now, which is all the stuff up here. Icons width, icons bar height. There we go. I realized why I was not able, I was changing the icon right here. So the bar configuration, as you saw, changed all the bars that with all this bar stuff going on. But then for icon configuration, I started changing it, but it wasn't doing anything. It was icon size, it wasn't doing anything because these are specific and I have specific things for them, not the default settings. So if I did go over here to buffs and I wanted to create this as icons right here. So now here's the buffs, and let's say that for demonstration purposes, I go to defaults. These are now operating under defaults. These have been locked in specifically, like I'll show you here in a second. The icon configurations for bar height, or sorry, icon size. You can change the icon size. You can change the scale of them, how big they get. You can change the horizontal spacing between them, how much they overlap and all that kind of stuff. And you have all those different changings here, just like you do with the bar settings. So I'm going to just press reset format just to reset those back to some sort of default right there for that. And then the next part, for the fonts and textures, you can change the font of what these things are. I have this set to Accidental Presidency. I do like 2002 as well. Sometimes that looks nice. But for the font, for the wording, I do like the look of this. Again, everything is up to your choice. You can change now the wording of all the different types of things. So labels are going to be the labels inside here. Time text as far as the duration of things as they count down. Icon text, panel board, all of those things are taken care of in this. And then bar icons, this is the smooth texture. I usually use the smooth or solid texture. You can change the textures around as far as what these bars look like. Change the opacity, all the different stuff here. Plenty of options, as you see, all self-explanatory. And the standard color, you can change this. I don't see why to change it. I like to have these default colors. They match up to the default Blizzard UI as well, so I'll keep that. Time format, as far as how long that you want to show the buffs for, you can change that. And this is, again, you can just see the settings I use and change them to matches if you want. If you want to hide the Omni CC, that's the long buff trackers right there. In fact, let me go back to setup and toggle test mode again. If you want to, you can change to where you can hide that if you want. I leave it open. I like OmniCC. And everything else here, I don't really mess with too much. Sound channels, I don't really have any sounds going through any of this. And then that's all pretty much done for the defaults. Also, if you don't want to mess with the defaults, you can just specifically change each one of them, because each one is going to have a different spot for a different thing. You might want to only specifically change each one. So spells. We're going to do this spell section here. We're going to do this spell section last. This was something very complicated to me that I will save for the end of the video, but it is something very important to be able to customize it with these little snags that might come up. So now for the bar groups, this is really the last big place that you have to upgrade or change things around for. So for bar groups, you're going to select which one of the bar groups you're going to be addressing. So do I address the target debuffs? I'm only affecting this now. If I change this to buffs, I'm only affecting this now. If I change it to debuffs, I'm only affecting this. You see what I'm saying? So now I can actually change and tweak around what it is that I want. Again, I do want to change the settings on my short and long buffs. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to long buffs, and there we go. We are now affecting and changing the long buff. So with this and any other thing you do, this is the general settings. Again, the general settings affect everything, and then everything else after that affects specifically certain things. So I'm enabling the bar group in general. If I take it off, now I've just turned off that. No, I want it there. You can lock or unanchor and all that kind of stuff all here if you want. You can name the bar group whatever you want as far as for your own organization purposes. For the sharing thing, you can link settings between similar things. I in general don't do this because I've changed them all based on how I want them. This is something you can play around with if you have similar things you want to all be the same. So sort order, you can change by alphabetize. You can change the duration, sort from left to right. You can have your buffs first and other people's after that. All of this, the order in which that they come in to the lineup is right there. Again, if you wanted to here, you can shift, I think shift left click, toggles, and shift right click flips it. So you can flip it over here, and if you want to fill in this way, you can, or flip it back this way and fill it in this way. So I'm going to keep this. I might have just messing things up. That's why I have a different profile here. And then show when. This, you can have it set up to where these buffs and whatever you're and again, this is for all of the different things. Maybe it's your combat tracker, maybe it's your cooldowns, whatever it is. All of these you can choose when they load. It only loads if you're playing a hunter. It only loads if you're in arena, whatever you have your settings with. So I want them to just always show. So except in a pet battle, there you go. Or you can set up a specialization and have it only be in a certain spec or whatever you have there. Okay, cool. And then opacity, you can change the opacity of these things. Out of combat, as you see, these for my long buffs, the opacity is 0.8. They're just a little bit faded. I have them fade just a little bit whenever you're out of combat, just to kind of look through them, not to where. In fact, I could probably change it to like that, and they get a little bit more faded whenever I'm not in combat. So when I'm in combat, they're all the way in. But when I'm out of combat, you can fade them out a little bit, or you can change it to where you only see them on mouse over if you want it like that. And you could do out of combat, you can have it be nothing, right? You can have it be nothing out of combat and they're gone, but then mouse over is 1. So when I mouse over it, I can see them. I think that would be another really clean way to do it. But in general, sometimes I do like to see my buffs. I'm not too worried about that. So I'm going to have it be In fact, I'll just do 0.65. Cool. And then you fade. Awesome. Special effects, don't worry about that. And there we go. These are different little miscellaneous options if you want to kind of mess around with some things here. I don't really touch that. So that is how the long buffs work for the general settings. But now you can go to specifically buffs, debuffs, cooldowns, layout, all these different things. So for buffs, you can track specific different buffs. You could only track buffs that are from the boss. You can track now whatever kind of buff you want from whatever source. So excluding certain targets casted by certain targets. Anyone is what I have selected on the player. That's what I'm targeting. I'm targeting the player's buffs of anything. So I keep it very basic because you can get really super intricate with this. Spell list, you can filter by the spell list. As you see right now, a blacklist means there's a certain list and anything on that list is blocked. That is how that works. It accepts everything except what's on the blacklist, right? Have you heard of like celebrities getting blacklisted from places? Whatever. A whitelist is the exact opposite. A whitelist means it blocks everything except this thing on this list. So if you want this to only show one thing, you would choose whitelist and add the spells to it. But again, we'll talk about the spell list here in a second. So ignore that for right now. And there we go. So that's the buffs section. And then debuffs is the same thing. This is my long buffs. It doesn't show debuffs, so they are not on right now. Cooldowns, I don't track those either because this is just for long buffs. The layout now. This is the configuration, icon configuration, how much they wrap. So at 10, so let me turn this on. So I just shift left click. At 10 buffs, it cycles to the next one, right? So 10, the 11th one goes right there, right? So I have it set at 10. Wrap direction, you can switch the direction that they wrap, and it could wrap upwards instead of downwards, whatever you want there. All of that is for your configuration of how they're all positioned with each other. And the format is all the same stuff too. So if I click this, it's use defaults, like we just talked about in the default section right here. But I have unselected use defaults, and I'm specifically setting them up all individually. And this is the settings that I have. So if you wanted to copy and you like the way this looks, you wanted to copy it, it would be right here is what you copy. And then for the text settings, it's the same thing with the text. Where are they at? Where the positioning, all that kind of stuff, right? And everything else below this doesn't really matter too much. The display position, I move around with this. You can change them with the actual, X and Y coordinates if you want. Appearance is the last big thing here. Again, you can choose to use the default appearance if you would like, but I like, if you remember seeing here, all of these things, I like the way my debuffs work right here for the appearance, how the numbers all set. So here I'm going to go to copy from. So again, I'm under the long buffs. I'm in the long buffs right here, and I'm going to copy from debuffs. So I'm going to go here, copy from debuffs, right? And now they should look similar. So that has changed the numbers. You can see the numbers that are in the center now. They're the same size number here, but they're in the wrong position. So we're gonna have to manually do that. So label here doesn't matter too much for these icons as far as what the appearance for the icons are, because that's like the name of what this is, and these don't have words on it like that. The time text does matter. So if you see the opacity of this is turned all the way down, if you turn it all the way up, you see that numbers that come in right here at the bottom that are ticking up right now. Those are what you can change if you want to have the time here. I personally like to have the time on the actual debuff right here. So I have turned the opacity on these things all the way down. So I don't even use the time text because I have the default OmniCC, I think it is, that shows the overlap there. So icon text now, this is what we're talking about here. So if I go here in the icon text, 20 is what it's at right now, and that's what shows the stack count in the middle of the thing. So I am going to keep it back to 20. The opacity is all the way up, and I like to have these as all the settings for it. But now the position of this, I want to move the position, which we'll get to here in a second. For panels and borders, I don't mess with this again. There's a background panel you can have on this thing, and I just don't mess around with the panels. I like the way it looks like that, so that's the settings I use there. And for the rest of this, I just keep it all pretty basic, all pretty simple as far as the rest of these go, and the colors and all the same things with all my settings here. So you can see all the settings in one little spot. So now to move that timer, because right now it's still overlapping here, the last final option is the timers, right? So I'm going to need to move around the offset. Actually, no, the timer section here is just for keeping things uniform within the duration. These are the settings that I use as far as specifics about timers. But again, I use OmniCC for a lot of the timing stuff that you see going on over here. So it's in layout. I skipped it and doubling back here. So format settings, it changes the size and actual buttons of what all this looks like, right? And then the text settings here is what we're looking at. Label text is the actual word of what this is, kind of like what this would be the words on here, but icons don't have words. The time text is what I actually have blurred out and it's completely gone, so you don't even see it at all. And now icon text. So inset changes left and right, offset changes up and down. I don't know why they don't just say like X and Y or whatever, but I want to change this to go down further. So I'm going to have this, again, let me turn this on right here, left clicking it, and I have the offset down right there. There we go. And that is all I needed, just to have the buttons a little bit lower right there. Now I can go to short buffs and fix them the same way, but I'm going to do it in the most efficient way possible instead of manually doing each one. I'm going to go to short buffs. I'm going to go to layout. At the very, very top of layout, I'm going to copy from long buffs. And oh my God, it copied from the long buffs. And I'm going to go to appearance up to the very top, copy from long buffs, and I can copy the appearance of the long buffs. And it's really nice that you can copy it based on just these individual preferences of how you're changing stuff. So now my short buffs, long buffs, and debuffs all look great. Now under the next option, we have conditionals, which I don't mess with conditionals at all. In combat bar is an interesting bar. I'm going to go ahead and show you what it looks like here. So the in combat bar is buffs that dynamically show specific ones you want to track only in combat. So I'm going to put, for the sake of this, demon spikes. And you can add in as many buffs as you want. You manually add them in there. You type in the buff's name you want to track, click OK. It makes a new buff list for you of demon spikes. And then now, if you see it up here, it's way up here. It's this tiny little thing. It's this tiny little button you can move around. Again, you can change the size of it, the icon size. As you see here, it's like much bigger now. I'll put it down to some sort of medium level. You can change the spacing, scale, all of the same stuff as usual here, right? But what this does, it's really cool, is if I use demon spikes, it shows it right there. And it's a combat buff tracker. It shows you when the buff pops up or on yourself. So now this one little spot shows specific buffs, and it has this big animation that you can change as well. So I think it's a really interesting. Again, I use weak auras, and I would even make a weak aura that could do that. So I don't use that too much, but if you really like that option, you totally can. And there's a little pulse at the start is what you saw. You can have a pulse whenever it leaves. So it just is like, hey, you got the buff now. So really, if I were to do this for demon spikes, I might turn off the pulse at the beginning and make the pulse at the end. So I would use this ability. It's a tanking ability you want to keep up on yourself all the time, and it would let me know when it falls off so I could use it again, right? But again, this is a really cool little bar right here, but in general, I'm going to delete that, and I'm not going to use, I'm not going to enable that bar. I'm going to disable it here. Really cool option though. And then we're back to the profiles. So the last thing I want to show y'all is spells. Spells are so cool. In fact, I'm going to do this with this little buff bar here. So just for the sake of this, I'm going to go to bar groups. I'm going to go to buffs, and I'm going to make them real big. I'm going to go to the general, or I'm going to go to the layout here. I'm going to make them real big. There we go. So now I have this weird buff. It says pain. I don't know why it says this. It's a weird thing in Raven, and it almost made me not use Raven. I was like, why is it showing this? This is very strange. I don't want this constantly on there. And if you have the anglers thing, or you have whatever type of different, like a tabard, maybe you don't want to always see your tabard as a buff. If you ever get a buff or a debuff or anything shows up on these things that you don't want to be there, here's how you handle it. You go to spells, okay? And you go to spells, and we're going to create a spell list. All this stuff up here with the warning section up here, I don't know all these warnings. It's kind of weird. Colors and labels, I'm not going to change anything up here with expiration times, none of this. This is the part that got really confusing for me. So don't look at this. It's not useful. Now for spell list, I'm going to do a spell list here, and I am going to create a new spell list. So we're going to make a new spell list here, and I'm going to call this YouTube test, and that's going to be the spell list. So, okay, cool. We have a YouTube test spell list, right? And this, I can create a new spell list. I can copy a spell list. I can delete a spell list, whatever. But enter a spell. I'm going to enter in this spell because I don't want to see it, right? So now I can enter in pain, and I type it in exactly as you see it, pain, and I click OK. And then it shows pain. It even shows the icon there. And now it's that, oh, hey, that's it. That's what I'm talking about. Yes. Now, I have made a list now. I can add in more. In fact, I'm gonna use an ability of Demon Hunters called Immolation Aura. See how the Immolation Aura? Maybe I don't really want to track that at all ever. So I want to put an Immolation Aura there. So I can go enter spell, Immolation Aura. I click OK. Now that's on the list as well. So the YouTube test list now has 2 things on it of pain and immolation aura. And you can put whatever else you want on there. I'm making a list, right? Now, this is going to be this is the most important part. Again, spell alerts, I don't mess about that. Internal cooldowns, I don't mess with any of this. I don't mess with any of this. I don't mess with anything else. The only part that matters is this little sliver right here. It's the only thing that matters. So once you have established the list you want, you go to the bar you want. So I'm going to go to bar groups, and I'm going to go to the bar group I want, which is buffs in this case. This is my buff bar. So once I have buffs, I'm going to go to the buffs section of buffs because these are buffs. Pain is a buff. Immolation aura, this is a buff that I have on my character right now. I'm going to go to buffs, and I don't want to see them. So I'm going to scroll down. Remember that spell section we were talking about here? So I want to select, if you don't have anything selected, it's just going to let everything go. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. But if I select blacklist and I select the spell list, right? And I choose a spell list, it's going to block those spells. Right? And as you saw, even with DH list, it blocks it because guess what? That pain thing is on the DH list as well. So you go to blacklist, and that means it's accepting everything except what's on the blacklist. And then you select the spell list number 1 as your list. And I'm going to put YouTube test list in there. So it blocks it, right? So anything, it will block anything on this list, right? And now if I press immolation aura, and I'm going to show, you can see my character. I have immolation aura on, and it no longer tracks it because it's on the blacklist, and I have blacklisted that specific spell. And if this, WoW's 18th anniversary, I want to see if I can block this. So I go back to spell list. So enter in a spell. There's a spell ID. I don't want to type in WoW's 18th anniversary. I think that I might mess up. You can see here, spell ID. I have an add-on called ID Tip. ID Tip that's what the add-on is, and that's what gets you the spell ID name. So the spell ID name is 359530, and that is the specific spell for this thing. I click OK, and it loads it in there, and oh my gosh, it just took it off immediately. And as you see, I still have this buff. I am tracking this buff with my long buffs, but now this one, I have added the WoW's 18th anniversary thing to my spell list on the blacklist for this list that I made. And now whenever I go back to bar groups, it's blacklisting that. I'm good. If for whatever reason you wanted to whitelist something, then it would only show those things. It would only show those buffs. And if I do other things, I'm pressing other abilities, I'm pressing other buffs right now. I should have other buffs right now, but it's only showing me these because if you want to whitelist, it's the same concept as blacklist, but instead of blocking them with a blacklist, block, whitelists only show specifically the ones that are on that list. So now those 3 things that I added to this YouTube list on the whitelist, those are the only things that are going to show. So now I'm going back to profiles and going back to my main setting right here. And actually I need to fix those things because I did that in the test version. So I'm going to fix those real quick. There we go. Simple enough. All I literally did was went to bar groups. I did the copy from layout. I went to appearance, copy from layout, and I was good to go. So now if you like that, I hope that this add-on has shown you the possibilities of what you can accomplish and what could take your game to the next level, make it more fun, make it more efficient, help you play the game at a higher level, whatever your goals are with the game. I hope that I've helped you in some way in this video, and I have a ton of other videos on the channel about keybinds, macros, interface. I have other stuff coming out for any sort of expansion that's happening, Dragonflight right now, whatever it is. And if you want to go to the next level with that support, you can check out the link down in the description for my Patreon to help support here what I do with the channel. If you want even specific help, because patrons have a specific Discord, you can get on that Discord, ask me a bunch of questions, we can try and troubleshoot some stuff if anything pops up. So stay creative, think outside the box. Peace.